There we go. We are live. All right. Very good. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner Break Time Story Time. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Truichi, also known various places online as Byronofsidius. And tonight I am going to be here on the Break Time Story Time number 20, continuing with the presentation of an Amelia City story entitled Ringing. Before we get started with that, I have once again included in the description of this stream on both Rumble and YouTube, you should see it in the description box below, a link to the channel for Brother Cortex. If you're looking to find any of the deep dives with Cortex and Byronofsidius, which is our weekly Wednesday morning kind of deep analysis and geek out kind of program wherein we dive into sort of analog horror and online supernatural and mythological tales, such as the Backrooms, the SCP Foundation, the Amala catalog. You can find that on his channel on YouTube and the link below. We also have a deep dive analysis series that we did on Amazon's Fallout program that we pretty much tore that the fuck apart from stem to stern. And that analysis is also available for watching on his channel. I highly recommend going back and giving that a watch. I think I need to recommend he put that into a separate playlist for him and I both to share around as, hey, we can get really deep into the weeds on things if you give us a chance. And then there's also a couple of new links down below. If you are looking to find a couple of brothers who are deep-seated in their love of lore, of legendarium, mythology, and folklore, then you could certainly hardly do better than following the works of the Brothers Krynn over on Substack. You can follow the link below to their profile on that platform. And if you're looking for some more thoughtful and thought-provoking science fiction, then I would recommend that you go to the last link in the description below to follow the works of the Black Knight on Substack, as every Tuesday is Terran Tuesday, and that gentleman is a fine storyteller of the third of the primary triumvirate of genres in genre storytelling, those being fantasy, sci-fi, and horror, although I myself don't do as much sci-fi, hence why I can deeply appreciate the efforts of the Black Knight on Terran Tuesday. If you haven't already got a Substack profile, worry not. You don't need to have an account on the site. You can still follow the link below and try to routinely, perhaps bookmark his page so that you can come back to him every Tuesday to read what he may have on offer for you and your science fiction aficionados. So now that that is out of the way, let us proceed with the presentation of Ringing, an Amelia City story. The following morning, as she climbed out of bed, Helen decided it might behoove her to take a walk in the daylight and get some fresh air. Sure, the city and her internal struggle with whatever madness was building within her mind terrified her in the dark of night. During the daytime, though, she believed she might be able to work through some questions and put herself at ease. Donning a long blue skirt and plain white blouse, worn under a waist-length gray wool jacket, Helen headed down to the ground floor and then down the street towards the grocery store. She would stop in there on her way back home from, well, wherever her feet took her. She wanted to cook herself something fresh for lunch before heading to the restaurant for a short 4-hour shift. Hey, Brother Cortex, you just farted, and I just linked people to our programs, hoping that they'll head on over to your channel and give a watch through, particularly our breakdown of Fallout. The balmy morning of Amelia City showed it for what it was to most residents and observers, a city architecturally stuck somewhere at the tail end of the Industrial Revolution. Helen thought it looked like the perfect setting for a noir film, one of those private detective murder mysteries that soared to the pulp magazine heights in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and served as the foundation or inspiration for many of the tales of DC Comics' The Dark Knight. Not much, Brother Cortex, just doing my usual. How you doing, sir? Sorry about that. Back to the story. Past the Jubilee Grocers, on the opposite side of Rawlings Street, upon which stood her own building, Helen saw an empty playground, the light, warm breeze blowing through, causing the swings to creak on their rusty chains. Driven purely by impulse, she checked both ways and crossed the street to the playground. The swing set was closest to her, with a construct of splintery old wood nearby containing monkey bars and slides and rattling faux bridges. Rope ladders hung off of the sides, something she had always loved to climb on as a child. Helen walked around the side of the construct and halted abruptly. Sitting in one corner of the playground were three little plastic rocking animals on heavy gauge springs. Used mostly by little kids, these had been neglected for years, if the little horse and crab rockers were the sole standards of measure. But they weren't. Helen approached the third one cautiously, as it looked damaged. The last rocking animal was a little cow, painted in various blobs of color, like a rainbow. Its eyes were sleepy, dopey, but its smile was quite large. She crouched down next to the rocking cow, her jaw set, the smell of rust heavy in her nostrils. Helen spat on the side of the plastic cow's face. "Fuck you," she rasped. The cow's eye rolled up toward her, and the mouth closed in a tight-lipped line. "No, man, fuck you," the dull stoner's voice droned, and the three rocking animals began hammering back and forth into the ground, the peal of children's laughter and squeals of excitement blasting Helen's ears. She turned to run, tripped over her own feet, and crawled until she could get to her feet, fleeing the little playground. Her jaunt at an abrupt end, Helen didn't bother with the Jubilee stop, just heading for her building. She'd heat up her last Hot Pocket, head into work, and confirm for herself that she had another 2 days off coming up. She needed the time away, not only to try and relax, hopefully catch a break in her spiral into insanity, but to go to the dim domain so that she could do her review assignment for Fashion Forward. Chat here? All right, brother. You take care, brother. We will get that done so we can do a stream on my channel as well, Cortex. We'll get that arranged. She tried to remember what her parents had told her about her grandmother when she was younger. They'd said that her symptoms came on slowly, becoming more noticeable over time. And there was something else, something important, that she just wasn't remembering. Thanks, brother. You take it easy as well. When Helen got home, sitting down with her Hot Pockets, she hopped online and did some research into the onset of early-stage schizophrenia. During her research, she found what she had forgotten on a mental health website. In the early stages of the psychosis, most schizophrenics experienced a stretch of 3 to 7 days of intense hallucinations, which would then taper off completely and be gone for several weeks, sometimes months. The initial psychotic break could happen at any time, though for female patients, it usually occurred during their mid to late 20s or 30s. In males, the typical initial incident was in their teenage to early 20s range of years. Helen changed into her work uniform, then headed to the bathroom to do her hair. She was surprised to see that she had tears slowly streaming down her cheeks. Given what she had been confronted with, recognizing that her sanity had begun slipping away from her, a few tears would be more than understandable. Helen Green wiped away these bits, and finished getting ready for work. Helen was reading the newspaper back in the break room, taking a few minutes to get off of her feet. It had been a slow shift thus far, and with only 2 of 4 hours left, she didn't want to have sore feet and very few tips by the time she headed home. She'd only been sitting down for 3 or 4 minutes when Eric, the manager on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Friday afternoons, came in looking troubled. "Helen?" "Yeah." She set the newspaper down. "Have you seen Ramon?" "No, not since I got in." "Did you check out back? He might be grabbing a smoke." "I checked out there first thing," Eric said, his hands on his hips. "He's never just disappeared like this. If you see him, tell him to get his ass back in the kitchen. Bobby needs to go on his break." Helen watched Eric slide back out of the break room. She knew full well where Ramon was. He had told her he was going out to his car to have a little green time, about 10 minutes before she came back to the break room. It wouldn't affect much of anything, because Ramon was a wizard in the kitchen, high or sober. She turned her attention back to the paper on the table before her. The break room door opened again, and in strode Ramon, his eyes bleary and bloodshot. "Yo, boss come looking for me?" "Yeah, he says Bobby's got to go on break soon. You may want to head back into the kitchen." Ramon nodded, then stopped by the door and looked back at Helen. "What's up?" "I think that guy from the other night is hanging around the parking lot," Ramon said quietly. "You got anybody that can give you a ride home?" "It'll be okay," Helen said with a bright smile. "Today is not the kind of day where someone would want to really push me." Ramon nodded, then disappeared back into the restaurant. Helen returned to the floor 5 minutes later. While she was taking the order of a family seated near the windows facing the parking lot, she noticed that it was already starting to get dark out. Peering outside, she caught sight of a darkened, man-like figure darting away from the lot. Something that looked like a bat flew after the man. Something with a body that was round and white, like a skull. The sun had set 20 minutes before the end of her short shift, and Helen no longer felt so confident about walking home on her own. Ramon had seen the strange man in the parking lot, possibly the same man that had been in the alley. If the two were one and the same, then she might not be crazy after all. Reality itself may have simply decided to take a holiday. Helen clocked out and grabbed Lana, one of the other waitresses, on her way out. Lana agreed to drop her off, and 6 minutes later, she was stepping into the elevator of her building. Nothing out of the ordinary happened on her way up. Helen got into the apartment and got changed into loose sweatpants and a yellow camisole, pulled her bed down out of the wall, and settled in to watch her copy of Down with Love for the 10th time or so that year. She tucked her grandmother's diaries into the small coat closet by the front door before heading to work. They had remained there, forgotten for the time being. And for an hour before she fell asleep to the movie, Helen forgot everything. All of her troubles, all of her cares. Skullbats and Technicolor cows be damned. Early to rise, early to bed. Makes a man healthy, but socially dead, Helen quipped as she stretched on her bed, waking up at the ungodly hour of 5 in the morning. She eyeballed the alarm clock like it had committed a crime against her, turned the television from her DVD player to regular cable, and flipped until she hit a news channel. Helen wasn't heavily into politics, but it beat early morning infomercials. She nipped into the small kitchen area, got coffee going and a blueberry muffin from the pantry cabinet, and then returned to her Murphy bed. Content to watch CNN until one of her regular later morning shows came on an hour later, Helen drank her coffee and thought about the trip that she'd have to take today. Bringing the laptop over to the bed, she checked the bus schedules for the day. If she wanted to get to the city's north side, the earliest bus that she could catch was at 10. The route was circuitous and would drop her off at around noon. Alternatively, she could take the subway to the Fuller Street station and walk 3 blocks west to the dim domain. The nearest station was a 10-minute walk away, and the trains ran all the time. Helen decided that this would be the better course to take. Having a little spare time to kill, she popped her copy of Mean Girls into the DVD player and settled back onto the bed to watch. As the movie began, she quickly checked her video stats from Fashion Forward, pleased to see a spike in recent viewing activity. Helen thought the day might go well after all. Karma is a lovely thing, Helen said to herself as she passed through the turnstile. The passenger ahead of her, a jowly grandfather type, accidentally had put too much change into the counter. He turned to her, smiled, and told her that it was okay for a pretty girl to hop a ride on his dime. Helen had been complimented by a passerby on her hair on her way down into the station only a couple of minutes before that, and now she stood on the platform waiting for the train. Someone standing nearby smelled faintly of lavender, one of her favorite aromas. The train arrived a few minutes ahead of schedule, and Helen managed to find a seat next to the woman with the lavender perfume. All in all, this was a promising start to her trek. She took out her cell phone, booted up her Kindle program, and started reading Terry Pratchett's Hogfather. Side note. Highly recommended. When the train pulled into the Fuller Street station almost 40 minutes later, she locked her phone and collected her purse, pulling down her flat red skirt before stepping off of the train. She waited until she was up on the street again to pull out her phone and boot up her GPS application. It was a good day for walking, and plenty of other Amelians seemed to have the same idea. The sidewalks weren't packed, but a healthy concentration of folks moved along around her. Following the arrows on her phone, Helen arrived in front of the dim domain some 20 minutes later. She could have moved quicker, but she kept a slow pace so that she could window shop and just look around. She hadn't really taken the time since moving downtown to appreciate the size and scope of Amelia City and its bounty of offerings. Despite the aged architecture and urban legends that infested the area like a sore tooth, it was really a marvelously built city. The front of the dim domain featured 2 display windows with mannequins done up in modern goth attire, standing in front of black curtains to block out the view of the inside of the store. These flanked the main door, which had dark purple curtains serving for the same function, but it fluttered a little from the door being opened just a crack. When Helen entered, she got the impression that, unlike Spencer's or Hot Topic, this store was devoted to actual hardcore goths instead of poseurs. 3 clothes racks stood in the central space, and most of the selection was black, purple, or red, as she might expect. On the left wall of the main shop were all manner of accessories and outfits, including a skimpy white dress of the sort that Helen had heard referred to grotesquely as Lolita Goth. To the right were display cases, the register, and seated behind that with a comic book open before her, a young woman with more metal in her face than Helen had in her kitchen. The young woman's hair was shaven clean to the head on the near side of her skull, colored an electric blue on the other side. She wore a leather vest with several shiny pins, and kept her heavily eyeshadowed eyes in her comic even as Helen approached. There were armbands and rings galore in the display case, as well as chokers, handcuffs, and a riding crop. Helen tried not to look at the little sign over some of the piercing studs declaring where exactly they went, as she approached the clerk. She cleared her throat meaningfully, and the young woman looked up from her comic book, a dull sheen in her eyes. "Can I help you?" Yes," Helen said. "I hope so. I understand you're carrying a new nail polish line here from Glam Incorporated." "Oh, yeah, that. Back wall, in with the other makeup stuff." Helen thanked the clerk and wove her way around several shelving units displaying everything from candles and books about vampires to leather bondage masks and ball gags. She had never assumed that goths necessarily went in for the whole BDSM thing as a whole, that they weren't intertwined. But she understood the business sense in lumping the 2 things together for the curious customers who might pass through on a whim. The back wall of the store consisted of keychains, small plushies, and trinkets, almost exactly like a Hot Topic store. She located the small display shelves on which sat the new Glam Incorporated products and knelt down, working her way through the selections on offer. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a tall, angular man in a long, wide black coat rush through a black door that Helen had seen while she was coming back here, a door marked Employees Only. The woman at the counter shouted, "Dude, what the hell?" "Is everything all right?" Helen asked, as the clerk stomped around the counter and made her way back. Her Night of the Living Dead shirt hung down over leather-studded pants that matched her vest perfectly. "Hell no, everything's not okay." "Wait here," said the clerk, not even turning to look at Helen before shoving her way through that black door, calling out, "Hey, dickhead!" The door clapped shut, and Helen heard muffled shouting. The clerk's shouts quickly became screams, and there came a clamor, as if a fight. Helen reached for her pepper spray, remembered that she had lost it, and stood there for a moment as she weighed the risk of putting her martial arts training against this unknown assailant. She was, after all, barely a slip of a woman. Deciding the right thing to do was to try to help, she took out her phone, dialed 911, and set the phone on a nearby shelf. The police would be able to pinpoint the phone if it was left on, even if she didn't stay on the line, or so that was her understanding. She tucked her purse in among the plushies to hide it, braced herself with a breath, and shoved the bar on the back door, stepping through. The tableau before her threw her into paralysis. The back room of the store was a chamber hewn in uneven gray slabs of stone from floor to ceiling. 12 feet away sat a long conference table, with an old black rotary phone sitting upon it. To the right of the table stood the Technicolor cow, sleepy eyes locked upon Helen. To the left stood the clerk, wearing an impish grin. Next to her stood a shadowy figure in a long black coat, his features hidden in darkness except for glowing crimson eyes. This shadow man plucked one of the pins off of the girl's vest, a metal relief of a skull with bat wings and a single eye. The coated man threw the pin in the air, and with a flash of blue light, the shadow man disappeared, and the pin became the one-eyed skull bat. It flapped its wings and hovered backward, perching on the clerk girl's shoulder, like a parrot. The phone began to ring. The Technicolor cow, in its stoner's voice, said, "You gonna get that?" Helen, her lower lip trembling, walked slowly forward until she stood between the girl, whose eye sockets she now saw were empty and bleeding, and the cow, grinning its impossible grin. Turning her eyes down to the phone, she picked the receiver up off of its base with a shaking hand. She brought the receiver to her ear. "Hello?" The sound that whispered into her ear, a mix of whispered voices and bestial snarls and snappings, would have been oh so much nonsense to anybody else eavesdropping. For Helen, they were the sounds of sweet release. Officer Dodge looked over at the raving woman on the gurney, thrashing back and forth in her restraints, spit and blood flying from her mouth. Shards of glass shone in the daylight from her face and her hands. Dodge looked down at the goth girl and shook his head. "Now, you say she came in and seemed normal, right?" Yeah. She asked about this new nail polish that we just started carrying, then went back there and just sort of, I don't know, totally lost her shit. She left her phone out, and I don't have service hooked up here just yet for myself, for business. I left my phone in the car, so I just called you guys and hid behind the counter. I could hear her going apeshit in the back room. We saw that for ourselves. Now, Miss Blue Fleur," the young woman supplied helpfully, a smile framed by her piercings. "It's French. It means blue flower." "Right. Well, Miss Blue Fleur, do you want to press charges?" "Oh, no. That chick seems like she's already got enough problems of her own." The following day, authorities discovered the diaries of Helen's grandmother in her studio apartment, along with a third diary written by Helen herself in a composition notebook. The handwriting was jagged and sloppy, and filled 16 pages with lunatic ravings about a rainbow-colored cow and a flying skull, ringing rotary phones plugged into nothing, and a possessed playground. 2 weeks after being arrested for her psychotic break, Helen Green was transferred from the county lockup to the Ravenwood Manor, where she would be committed until such time as she could be safely released back into the public. Miss Bouffleur considered this as she read aloud a small article about Helen in the Amelia City Journal. She smiled in her chair in the middle of the stone chamber and looked over at the Technicolor cow and the skull bat that she had read the piece aloud to. None of them figured that Helen would be getting out anytime soon. After all, that's what happens in Amelia. Thus concludes Ringing, Amelia City Story. Not everyone who's a victim of the things that reside in the shadows of that unpleasant county in the state of Iowa, fictional though it may be, not everyone who is a victim to its denizens of darkness is slain. There are, after all, worse things than death. And Miss Helen Green, it would seem, has discovered one of those potentially worse fates. Sorry about that. Hold on. Sorry. So that brings us to the end of that Amelia City story. And I am glad to have brought this to you during the spooky season of October, the month of Halloween. So that would now bring us back to either returning to a Midwestern Yankee in King Olvan's Court for tomorrow and the remainder of the week. Though possibly there is another Amelia City tale that we could instead jump into, but I would generally tend to want to use this time, since we are in the spooky season, as I said, to at least I'll figure out one other Amelia City story to share before the month is over. But yes, I think for tomorrow, we'll go back to a Midwestern Yankee in King Olvan's Court, which is the primary story that I've been sharing here on the Break Time Story Time in the Storyteller's Corner. Get this reopened back to where we last left off. So that, and last we had left off with Midwestern Yankee. We had completed the presentation of Chapter 10, and we're moving into Chapter 11, entitled The Gatling Goblin. So that is more than likely where we'll pick up tomorrow. Now, obviously, I prefaced this break time stream by doing a little bit of promoting my friend Cortex's YouTube channel, as well as a couple of highly deserving writers over on Substack. And I do discuss Substack quite a bit, because it is where I tend to find myself going for the last 4 years, as an author, as a genre storyteller, coupled with BitChute and now more recently Rumble. They have pretty much supplanted my original older use of YouTube, which I had left behind really quite some time ago as an uploader of material, because that's just a very niche kind of thing and doesn't seem to get a great deal of traction on YouTube if you don't already have or command a large audience, and that's okay. smaller guy. But I intensely enjoy Substack, even though it's got many flaws, and a lot of those flaws have come as a result of the folks who run Substack trying to turn it into yet another all-encompassing pseudo-social media thing. I despise that. But another part of the reason I am recommending that folks head on over and start reading the authors and independent journalists on Substack is in large part because, like many other platforms that start to gain notoriety and start to gain some kind of reputation for being a reliable place to turn to, for interactivity, for news, for new material of an artistic bent of any sort, like any other website or application that starts becoming more social media-like. We're seeing it get dive bombed the last couple of months with giant named people from other communities and other places in media. This has already happened with quite a few folks who they're already authors. So that to me just makes plenty good sense. When Ursula K. Le Guin, I believe it was, landed on, or no, it wasn't K. Le Guin. I'm trying to think of who it was. I am misremembering, and I know I am. And I really shouldn't do that. Ah, damn it. This is going to bother me. I can't remember her name. That's really going to bother me. The point being, there are a handful of noted household name authors who already have a stable following, who have, over the course of the last year or two, landed ultimately on Substack. I understand them coming there. It's a platform that was ostensibly set up for writers, for authors, and independent journalists. So folks like Glenn Greenwald or Matt Taibbi showing up there made sense to me, particularly given Greenwald, how he had just left The Intercept and was looking for a viable alternative, although he ended up tucking tail and leaving Substack in the dust. And I don't expect it'll be too long before Taibbi and a handful of others do the same thing. But then you've got these other kind of pseudo-journalists and political commentators who are now dive-bombing the site and service. And I find it almost distasteful to see them dropping in, parachuting in. Most recently was Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks fame. She arrived on the platform with both boots strapped to her fucking ankles yesterday with a great big old, woe is me piece. And I initially wanted to be really pissed off. I felt this urge of, get the fuck out of here. What are you doing here? I did not want to give a shit that she was present, because she is going through this, I don't know, socio-political awakening, I guess, realizing that she has been far too to the left on fucking everything for way too long, until she finally, no offense, actually plenty of offense, I don't give a fuck if they're offended, she finally got what she voted for so many years when she was accosted by a homeless man while walking her dog one day. Now, I don't think it's appropriate what happened to her, but I'd also like to point out that for years and years and years, people were trying to point out to her from the other side of the political fence, hey, if you keep supporting these programs and these voting policy positions, this sort of shit is going to visit upon your head too. You're not immune just because you're hoi polloi and have a bunch of money and social media influence. You can be victimized just as easily as any other normal person going about their daily lives. And she never got the memo until reality slapped her upside the fucking head. And since then, she has come to recognize, slowly but surely, that she has been a little bit too fringy and too far over that way. And so she's trying to, I don't know, come back the other direction. Or so she claims. I don't necessarily trust a word that comes out of this woman. I don't trust it. I've got no reason to. Because I have seen this woman be an unforgiving prick to everyone who she sociopolitically disagrees with. I have seen her and heard her say, good, fuck them, to hell with them. One of her most famous memes is, give you the money? No, give me the money. And in her introductory piece, she talks about how she wants to get involved in open dialogue. But in her very first piece on the platform, the only people who can respond are paid subscribers. So you parachute in to what is supposed to be, ostensibly, an open place for the exchange of ideas and dialogue. But you demand that in order for people to be heard by you, your fucking eminence, that they have to be your own parachuted in followers who are already willing to be your personal pay pigs? Get bent. But I have to balance that with the understanding that if she leaves herself open to comment or reaction and response from everybody who's got eyeballs on the site, she will be deluged with notifications and with people wanting to put in their 2 cents. It can be kind of a lot. So I'm trying to balance in my head the response I should feel. Because I am torn. I get it. She's a notable figure. So having a control mechanism to tamp down on the amount of raw crazy that would be coming at her, it's understandable. At the same time, it comes across as intensely disingenuous of her to claim she wants to hear from the other side and from various perspectives, when the very people who she most needs to hear from are the kind of people she's been denigrating, demonizing, and telling to get fucked for years, who are not going to be willing to hand over their hard-earned money for the privilege of talking to her. Does that not get through her skull? I don't think it does. I don't think it gets through the skull of anybody who comes from her particular bubble when it finally pops, and now she has to search around for the next grift stream that she can walk down. It's insulting. I don't know if she intends the insult or not, but I'm not ready, and I don't think most people should be ready to offer instantaneous forgiveness. I did a piece on my Substack not that long ago, less than 2 weeks ago, talking about how we should probably re-implement a little bit of societal probation. When somebody fucks up, offer for them forgiveness, sure, but make sure it's conditional and that that person knows full well that if they fuck up again in short order, that they're done. Offer forgiveness, but don't let these same fuckers get too close, and let them know you're keeping a close eye on them. Yes, Lucian, exactly. The benefit of the doubt has its limits. It just does. I don't intend for these streams to devolve into that kind of growl fest. I just wanted to share my story and talk a little bit about Substack. I have one last smoke, and then I'm going to have to get back into work. But it drives me a little nutty because I have read some hauntingly beautiful poetry on Substack. I've read some tear-jerkingly hilarious observational pieces and witticisms on the platform. I've begun engaging in some genuine enjoyment of kind of more lighthearted swords and sorcery adventure fantasy on Substack. And I've enjoyed reading some military-style sci-fi on Substack. There's a couple of folks on there who I've started following and subscribing to who are doing realistic fiction kind of noir detective stories, serialized novels on Substack. And then you've got people like Anna fucking Kasparian who parachute in and suck all the oxygen out of the fucking room. With all of the 24/7 cable channels for news, with all of the streamers who endlessly prattle on about their socio-political commentary and perspectives, is there any place that can just be left alone for fiction? Any place? A lot of days it feels like the answer to that question is a resounding no. Why? I don't know. Some of the greatest lessons I ever learned, or the lessons rather that I have taken most to heart, have come from fiction. Some of them from sources you might not expect. The very first character or person who I took a lesson on valor, honor from, duty, was a cartoon character voiced by Peter Cullen, Optimus Prime. That's how much of a geek I am. But Optimus, in that old 80s cartoon, stood for duty, for honor, nobility, standing in the line of fire for your teammates, for your brethren, and doing the right thing, or at the very least trying to. We don't have valiant, noble characters in fiction anymore. Everything has to be everyone insists on all of these characters who are steeped in shades of gray. And okay, life is full of nuance. Reality is full of nuance. History, the best fiction, is full of nuance. But without having an outlier who is the square-jawed Boy Scout like Superman from the old Golden Era comics, if you don't have that character to compare the nuanced characters to as a goalpost, as an ideal, then everything is shades of gray. And shades of gray are kind of dull, kind of boring. That will be the true death of art. It will not be a conflagration of burning and weeping and gnashing of teeth. It will be the drudgery of hanging our heads as we drag ourselves off to another soulless, meaningless, worthless project created and produced in the name of meh. That's all I've got for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Sorry for the downer ending there, folks. I ask you to take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.